Help me welcome Mr. S. Siva, our moderator. He is the Group Head, Agri and IT Business at ITC Limited. Mr. Siva oversees the Agri and IT businesses of ITC Limited and is a member of its Corporate Management Committee. He also holds responsibility for ITC's sustainable and social investment programs. Thank you very much, sir, for being here today. Let's also welcome Dr. Hema Yadav, Director of Vamnicom and CIC TAB. Dr. Hema, as Director of Vamnicom and CIC TAB, is spearheading programs in building capabilities of cooperative banks, cooperative societies, good governance, compliances, and project planning. Thank you very much, ma'am, for being here this evening. Let's welcome Mr. C.S. Liew. He's the Director and Shareholder at Pacific Agri-Science Private Limited. CS is a citizen of Singapore and a graduate of Iowa State University in agronomy and pest management with 45 years of global experience in agricultural inputs industry. And CS is currently working on a few global deals and also helping set up startups with good and patented technologies in the bioagricultural inputs sector, and of course helping them raise capital or going global. Thank you very much for being here all the way from Singapore. Let's also welcome Dr. Venkatesh Devanur. He is the founder and CEO AgriLife and SOM Phytopharma India Limited with over 45 years of significant experience in the crop care and crop protection industry in India. He is the CEO of SOM Phytopharma India Limited, and AgriLife India, focused on agri inputs for organic agriculture, manufacturing biopesticides, biofertilizers, and biostimulants. Thank you very much, sir, for being here this evening. And let's now welcome Dr. Subba. He is the Agri Advisor, ex-President, Africa and Middle East of Cooperative Agri-Science. Dr. Subba is a strategic business leader with over 30 years of experience in agriculture, biosciences, and life sciences, and has served in various leadership positions, including the President of National Seed Association of India. So thank you very much, sir, for being here. And, sir, it's all yours. The mics are there on the center table. Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, one is a good start, second is a good link, and three makes it a pattern, as we are told. But I think 5th year of the ABSA event is really a big deal. That means it is here to stay. So all the very best, Raj and everybody else, for continuing success of the event and celebration of excellence in the agri field. And thank you all for this opportunity for the panel to talk around the subject of preparing for agriculture in 2030. Yeah, I mean, agriculture has been around for thousands of years. And what's so very different in 2030 that was not there in the past, even the more recent past. As Pallavi started saying, in the 1960s, we had the Green Revolution when food security was the paramount important element towards which the country focused on and worked. I think as we moved along, then the country felt that farmers' incomes haven't kept pace, and a number of agriculture, marketing, and related kind of efforts took place thereafter. And then at another point of time, we saw that not enough value addition is occurring, and therefore thrust on food processing and growth of food processing industry happened, and so on and so forth over these years. I think as we look towards the current period and look forward to 2030, what is going to be different? Many things, of course, will be what is happening at this point of time. Many things will be additions. But I think fundamentally what will be different is that instead of one objective at a time, we probably need to work on all of them in a very integrated and in a systems approach, because they are all very intertwined. It's not enough to raise farmer income and impact environment, nor is it enough to deliver food security and offer that at low prices that is not profitable enough for the farmer. So that integration is something that we are going to see as the fundamental difference. Now, in addition to food security that we have largely accomplished, there are, of course, pockets of consumers who still can't afford. There is a very large public distribution system that supports it. But the big deal is the hidden hunger, not enough nutrition, especially children, mothers, adolescents, and so on. So therefore, the whole aspect of nutrition security, in addition to food security for growing population, is a very important objective as we work towards 2030. And in doing so, it has to be done in a manner that the natural resources are not getting consumed in a way that we can't afford to regenerate them. Many years ago, when the world started measuring what is called the Earth Overshooting Day, we were consuming natural resources in a year that we could regenerate that year itself. But over the subsequent period, we were consuming already by November what we could regenerate by December. And then October, and then September, and then August. And now, what we consume by July, we'll take 12 months in a year to regenerate. That means we are already stealing natural resources from our children and their children. So that's how serious the natural resource problem is, whether it's water, topsoil, and all of these issues. Then, of course, the bigger impact is climate change. The biggest risk, if any, for the farmer today is risk of climate. We have as many as 40% of all districts in the country with what is called incidents of swamping. That means which were otherwise traditionally flood prone are facing drought or vice versa. So that's something that we need to factor while enhancing our food and nutrition security. And last but possibly at this point of time most important is to do all this in a manner that agriculture is a profitable activity for the farmer and incomes go up, because the per capita income for the farming as a source of livelihood is a small fraction of any other source of livelihood for that matter. So because of this, the difference in 2030 as opposed to any time in the past is to look at all three in some manner in an integrated fashion. So therefore, how do we go about doing it is what we will discuss among the panelists. In a way, we will delayer and look at each of them separately, but the way the discussion will progress, I guess the intertwining nature of these things, we cannot get away from, and that's what will be hopefully evident, and the solutions are in a more systems form. So we will start with, as I said, farmers' income as the most paramount, and with that as the first round of questions that I'll have for the panelists. Each one brings a very diverse set of experience from their background, and therefore will have very interesting perspectives to deal with this topic. I'll start with Dr. Subba first. If you look at farmers' incomes, obviously it all starts with the value. Something has to be delivered to the consumer, and value needs to get created. Some value will need to get added as a route to farmer income. So what does it really take to deliver value to the consumer and then raise farmer incomes based on your experience?
Me okay? Okay. I think fully agree with you in terms of looking at it in a pretty integrated way. Having said that, I'll just focus on a few things and give a couple of examples as to how the consumer demands are driving the farmer incomes. They are realistic, it's no longer a theory in my opinion, and we have got some good examples. I'm going to give you some perspectives just to convince and make us believe that this is the future. So first of all, let us look at where the consumer demands are going to come from. So one is just the quantity of the food. For today, that is important for the world, for everybody. But you and I know that what are we really demanding after reaching certain income levels is beyond the quantity. It is just the nutrition, it is the quality of the food, it is the safety of the food, it is the healthy food that is one part of it. And the second one is, we will talk about in the next discussion, I'm sure, wherein there is a huge convergence that will come, how you are producing your food in a very sustainable way, whether it is a water conservation, less carbon dioxide emission, etc., etc. So fundamentally, if you look at the demand, where the consumers will demand in the future, either because of the personal choice in terms of nutrition and health, or imposed by the governments, whosoever you want to call, to just, you cannot produce food or buy food which is not produced sustainably. Let us take it at the fundamental drivers in the long run. Agriculture is a very slow game. It is not 20, 30, 50, you have to think sometimes. So from that perspective, I see as the fundamental drivers. Now, when you look at those aspects, I will give you two examples where I see this actually happening. Of course, this is not, in India also you know that, right? I think rice, as an example, all of us, some of us buy rice to 200 rupees a kilo, then some people buy 30 rupees, 40 rupees. You already have certain examples in India. Having said that, one of the examples that I wanted to take forward is, some of you may Google and see, there's a soybean called Plenish soybeans, which is actually gives you what you call trans fatty acids, right? All of us know that industry wants trans fatty acids is a big problem today when you eat the packaged foods. The Plenish soybeans actually gives you a better oil. And now, if you look at the complete value chain today, every year you will see on the website that the premium that is paid to Plenish soybeans is about 10% more than the commodity price. And that's a good example of as to how the farmers are being paid for a value that is demanded by the consumers. But having said that, now the most important thing is why it was not happening in the past and why it is happening now. That is the biggest question all of us have. I think the value chains, the information, the digital flow, and then one of our biggest problems for years together, who are working in this commodity value chain was there was not a good closed loop system wherein the farmers, the manufacturers, and the consumers are not so tightly linked. And that is changing, and that's changing very fast. The second example I wanted to talk about is, which I'm actually personally involved in India, is the low carbon rice. There are people who are changing these practices on the farm, and because of which the net carbon that is kind of indirectly measured is low, that is emitted into the environment. It's actually methane, which I will talk about later in another question. But having said that, we are trying to procure that commodity and pay a premium to the farmers because some of the companies who wanted to give it to the consumers who want to buy those food that comes from sustainable agriculture is a reality today, and it is also coming up. Well, these are all some of the examples I took from abroad, and very soon, as our society is progressing at a very fast pace in our average incomes or per capita incomes, these changes you will see are going to come much faster in India. So the point here is there are opportunities for each one of us to look at as to how to look at consumer changing demands. And if you could take it to the farm level, and if you're farmers, you can share some of the value, and that adoption is going to increase pretty fast, and that's how we'll work towards enabling them. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the underlying principle that you are pushing is how do you make your production system more demand responsive than just increasing production, because that also takes us to another perspective that, you increase production, raise productivity, all of that may be good, but given that India is somewhat a balanced supply and demand economy, we raise production and productivity a lot more, it's going to be lower prices, which has an impact again back on the farmer income, notwithstanding demand responsiveness and so on. And therefore, export markets become a very important way in which one can raise farmer income, which also brings us to importance of quality besides other aspects that you already talked about. Let me turn to our international panelists to look at something on export front. Is the source of higher income for the farmers lies in export market, and how do we go about capturing it? How can technology help at the back end to do that? Mr. Liew.
Thank you. Yeah, so export market is definitely something to look at, especially for Indian farmers and growers. But it's very interesting for me to note that India today is already an export powerhouse. Many people around the world don't even know that India exports something like 50 billion US dollars of food to the rest of the world. Everybody thinks that a lot of, many parts of India are still very poor, and it's a food deficit country, but that is not correct. This is the perception of a lot of people outside of India. But I know for a fact, pre-pandemic, I was over in Delhi attending a conference on food production and exports. At that time, the figure that was thrown about was 40 billion US dollars of exports of food out of India. Today, the figure is 50 billion, and it's still growing. And if I look at my own country, Singapore, we import food from 770-something countries, and India is one of them. And it's very gratifying for me to see that in the recent 4 or 5 years, that we have been receiving even fresh vegetables from India. It's now in the supermarkets in Singapore, outside of Little India. It's on the shelves of many supermarkets now in Singapore. But for India to realize, okay, now going back to the $50 billion, I think it's mainly food grain, like rice, right, which is a commodity. I think India needs to focus a lot more on horticultural exports, fresh fruit and vegetables, because that's where the value is. That's where farmers can make better money, right? But from what I can see in terms of what we receive in Singapore from India, fresh vegetables, I think the quality needs to be a little bit more consistent. The variety needs to be increased, because right now it's only a few varieties of vegetables that are exported to Singapore. There's a lot more that can be done. I think India now, out of the 50 billion US dollars of exports of food, only about 1% of that is horticultural exports. So in other words, what you're exporting are low price, low value commodities. So that needs to be changed. But in order for you to change, you need varieties, you need seed genetics, you need modern technology and tools, as Siva was pointing out earlier. You need better post-harvest technologies. They are all there, and there are some new ones as well, like gene editing, to come up with better varieties, better protein content, sugar content, better keeping quality. All these aspects are very important for exports, for farmers to capture better value, right? But overall, I'm an optimist when it comes to food security. I always believe that we have produced more food today than is needed. right? A lot of that is wasted in lack of usage of post-harvest technologies, in post-harvest handling, right? But why are all these technologies and whatnot not deployed, not utilized by farmers around the world? It's because food is too cheap. That's my view, right? The poorer people will not like to hear that, but basically, many farmers around the world are not making money because food is too cheap, it's priced too low, right? But why is that so? That's because food is a very sensitive, politically sensitive item. Governments tend to control prices, right, at the expense of farmers. We can grow a lot more. I mean, we are feeding 7.9 billion people today, but I can tell you without even expanding hectarage, we have enough technologies there in terms of productivity, in terms of post-harvest treatment, handling, to feed even 9 billion or 10 billion people, right? But it's not happening simply because farmers are not making enough money. So that part we need to give a focus on, right? So bottom line is focus on export, focus on horticultural exports, which is where the value is.
Thank you. I think after the demand response, we saw that there's even a bigger opportunity in exports, but we need to adopt technology, bring quality, but most importantly, how do you get the prices in a way they become remunerative is also an issue. But some crops, obviously, there is implication on what does it mean from a consumer perspective. So for all this, I think the challenge is how do you get the farmers who are largely small to access? How do you become demand responsive? How do you access technology? How do you improve your bargaining power and everything? So small by itself, how do you bring the power of scale to the small? What are some of the institutional mechanisms that exist? So can we turn to our cooperative expert, Dr. Hema, to talk to us? I mean, how do we really get all of this into the hands of the farmer and make all this opportunity a reality?
Thank you so much, sir. Am I audible? No. Yeah, have been very interesting to understand the remarks of Mr. Subba and Mr. Lewis. Yes, the problem of India is that we have small land holdings, small farmers, but at the same time, we have been very quick to respond to this smallness. And now we have the aggregation models which are kind of functioning in a very, very good way in many of the states. The new scheme of 10,000 FPO has exemplified as to how the small farmers have to be aggregated, and after aggregation, they need to be kind of taken ahead by having an institutional approach. So institutional building and capacity building are two ways of bringing the smallness to the level where they can kind of get connected to the high value markets like export. So you have the FPOs, the farmer producer organizations, can be registered as the farmer producer company, and they can be registered as a cooperative societies also. At the same time, you also have small, the SHGs which are working in all parts of the states. So institutional approach means to say that we have to understand that these are the institutions, and member centricity is very important in these institutions. Of course, FPOs are now seen as the people with the aggregation power, and they can kind of have a better say and control on the value chains. They can kind of have a negotiation power. They can kind of have value addition, and they can kind of have access to technology also, because we see a convergence between the FPO and the startups. Many of the startups are now working with the FPO and helping them with the better technology. At the same time, we see a lot of government schemes which are kind of converging towards the FPOs here. But what we see is that many of the FPOs, after the hand-holding from the government has been taken off, they would not be able to sustain. After 2 or 3 years, many of the FPOs would find it difficult to compete. The reasons being that FPOs would require to have the institution building and see that as long as the members see the benefit in being the member of an FPO or the cooperative society, that FPO would always be sustainable. And when the members see that the benefits are not coming, for example, the dividends are kind of lowered down, the members would lose the interest in the business of the institutions like FPO. So the FPOs have to be economically sustainable, and they also have to be socially also embedded. And therefore, the cooperative perspective, sir, is that we do not have to forget that the members are the core of the FPO, one. Second thing, after registration, they would face a problem like getting registered and complying with the Ministry of Corporation MCA. It becomes very difficult for them, and they are not able to comply with the registration, board of governance, the meetings, the audit compliances, even maintaining a balance sheet. They find it very difficult because they would not have an auditor, they do not have the CEO, and they do not have the CA. So what I'm trying to say here is that they would need the hand-holding through the institution building, help them to compliance in a better way, help them to understand the demand and supply in a better way, and also to understand the market information. Merely providing market information through an SMS or a mobile would not help him in making a decision support system. So helping them to understand the demand and to understand whether he has to store it, whether he has to market, or whether he has to go on the commodity trading are the things that would require a constant capacity building. And there, along with the 10,000 farmers, FPO, we also have a call for 2 lakh cooperative societies which are going to come into the villages. Each villages is anticipated in coming years to have 1 credit society, 1 dairy cooperative, and 1 fishery cooperative, depending on the resource base. So what I see is the immense scope for aggregation institutions at the grassroots level, which have the power to leverage the power of technology and the power of all the the markets that are open to all these people. So I see, sir, that institution building, capacity building, and hand holding in a long term would be what is required for the FPOs to provide the food security as well as to be profitable in long run.
Okay, so that's great. So not only is there an opportunity and optimism, but there's a way to accomplish it from a farmer's perspective. But I know that notwithstanding all this, if it rains too much or rains too little, rains at the wrong time, suddenly all this goes for a knot. Can we request Dr. Venkatesh to talk about how do you really build climate resilience in addition to being demand responsive and access technology and organize themselves as farmers and so on? So how do we really make that happen, beating the climate change?
Thank you, Kumar. Climate change is for real. We can't change it. Present deserts were once upon a time were the bottom of the oceans once upon a time. So like the change keeps happening. If I'm willing to walk in mid-afternoon Hyderabad at 40 degrees Celsius, if I don't carry umbrella, I can't blame the climate. Similarly here, we have reached a stage from 3% organic carbon level to 0.3% organic carbon level in soil, and we can't keep blaming the climate. Climate is there. Can we be resilient? Climate remains as it is, it keeps changing. Our practices certainly will need to improve. The macro situation, as a should be congenial to be a farmer, either by carrot or by stick or by carrot and stick policy. Today, I can go and dig borewell wherever I want, as many borewells I can have, get free water for that, free power for that, I don't pay 1 rupee, and get 6 rupees per kilo urea, which all of you pay another 60 rupees from your tax bracket. And on top of that, basically we have a situation where a farmer has no incentive or threat or a stick or a carrot to be adjusting to climate resiliency. So climate is there, it's going to be like this. Biological changes happen. Abiotic stress is going to be more and more and more. As the global warming happens, even 1 degree, half degree increase in temperature will result in pollination changes. 3%, for Dr. Subba is a breeder, he would know. 5%, 10% yield reduction can happen at 1 degree Celsius level. are we going to address this to farmer and help farmer to understand, my dear farmer, we need to change, you need to change. For that, I think we need to have certain public policy kind of carrot and stick to embrace the climate change. Then only we can be climate resilient. Thank you, Mr. Kumar.
So let me turn back to you to say that, yeah, it's good to say there must be right policy, carrot and stick. So are there some few specific things that you can suggest? This is how the policy, your wish list for policy, what would that be?
See, as long as we have the land holding patterns of less than 1 hectare per family of farmers, which is going down from 1 hectare to 0.75, 0.6 in 5 years from now, expecting that small farmer to be climate resilient is not going to be helping us. He will not respond. He has no incentive. If the policy, as you are asking, if there is a consolidation of holdings, land reforms where farmers can retain the ownership, but then allow the corporate sector to come in and do sort of a helping corporate farming, then, this kind of situation can drastically improve. So this is what I mean, sort of a macro change supporting a farmer required. A land use policy change. Today, farmers are scared to give land to anybody because I might lose the right of the land. And certain states like Karnataka, they're very strict. Whoever is tiller is the owner of land.
So, of course, many interesting experiments are happening around the country in terms of how do you really migrate out of the conventional policy. Some interesting work in the area of solar, bioenergy, all of that is also happening. Maybe you can turn to Hema ji and ask her thoughts on how do you really integrate some of these unconventional so-called farming into solar farming and bioenergy and those kinds of things and deal with this issue of climate change.
So in terms of renewable energy, one encouraging factor is that India is the 4th largest producer of the renewable energy. And India has been producing approximately 170 gigawatt of renewable energy, out of which 100 gigawatt are of solar energy. Rest are from the wind energy, the biomass energy, and the other alternative energy resources. How did we accomplish this, right? Ours is a tropical country with the full daylights that we have on the Tropic of Cancer and long summer times. And the solar alliances that we had started long time back at the grassroots level had a mixed kind of feedback. I mean, sometimes they were successful in some of the states, sometimes there were problems also. In terms of solar energy, what we are saying is that the farmers need to kind of contribute to the solar energy. And as the institutions, we are trying to encourage the cooperative societies to form cooperatives and to invest into the solar panels and to be able to produce the electricity and put it in the off-grid, and also by the off-grid, whatever surplus electricity they get, they are able to use in the society. Such examples are there in Maharashtra, in Gujarat, where a lot of cooperative societies are investing in solar energy. Coming to the biomass energy, sir, the evidence of the research that we conducted was that in biomass, basically the agriculture waste that we have, the problem is that there is huge demand. The problem is of the supply. The problem of supply is because the agri waste that gets collected in the farms, who is going to collect them? Because it's not some very interesting work that somebody is going to collect this kind of agriculture waste. The farmers would not have the interest in collecting the agri waste. So the problem was aggregating the agri waste, So again, we kind of are working with the Punjab government and we are working with the TIFAC as to how to aggregate this biomass and to put them on the bio-exchange. And through the bio-exchange, they would be able to make the briquettes. And these briquettes are being kind of, are in huge demand by the thermal plants, are in huge demand by the sugar factories, at least in Maharashtra. So you kind of have a complete value chain, the aggregation model, the bio-exchange for, the price discovery, and to have the buyers. And then you also have the demand coming from the industry to have a carbon footprint by having the biomass made briquettes in the fuel system. So at the supply side, sir, we have a huge scope for the FPOs and the cooperative societies to help out in these kind of supply chains. So we have huge examples of solar energy and the wind energy and also in the biomass energy where we are going to see a big change coming at the grassroots level.
Thank you. I think managing waste is an important area that one could work on, both in terms of incremental income for the farmers as also from a climate perspective. And certainly many people call it second harvest. What kind of international examples can we draw from, and possibly even in India, that Mr. Liew, we can ask you in terms of how does one go about creating wealth out of waste?
Okay, that's a very interesting topic and question, Siva. I actually wrote an article a couple of months ago. It was published in Agri Pages. It's called the second harvest. You know, how farmers can realize a second harvest from what they have harvested, what they have grown. What is meant by second harvest is really utilizing agricultural waste and turning it into useful products, right? So I can give you a couple or three examples internationally, and some are actually applicable to India as well. So one example is, you know, oil palm. Oil palm produces palm oil, which is consumed a lot in the Indian subcontinent, and India is a major importer. Indonesia is the biggest producer in the world. They have 16 million hectares of oil palm. Malaysia second, 6 million. Thailand third, 1 million. Nigeria maybe about 1 million as well. So these are the big producers. Now there is no use for the oil palm trunks. Once they reach 25 years, productivity goes down. Usually they are felled for replanting. But up to now, there is no use for the trunk. So what do they do in the past, the plantations? They used to burn them, and that pollutes the air, right? So what they have done in the last few years is burning is now banned in Malaysia, Indonesia particularly. And what they are doing now is to chip the oil palm trunks, right, to allow them to decay a lot faster over 2 years. If you leave the whole log in the field to decay, it will take about 4 years. So what they're doing is chipping, right? But this chipping of the trunks with an excavator to allow it to decay faster results in 4 issues. One, it costs money and labor, right, to chip their trunks. Number 2, as they decay, they actually emit carbon dioxide and methane into the air. So these are greenhouse gases. So again, you are contributing to climate change by doing that. The third problem is the chip trunks in the field tend to harbor pests like snakes, rhinoceros beetles, as well as rats. Rats actually eat the nuts, right? So they are major pests in oil palm plantations. The fourth problem is that by chipping and leaving them in the field and spreading them in the field, by the way, there's also another method. They pulverize the oil palm trunks into almost like sawdust and then spread them back into the field to allow them to decay. And that is even worse than just chipping the trunk. You are spreading diseases, right? There's a devastating disease in oil palm called Ganoderma. So in a way, you are spreading it, allowing it to spread even more easily. So when you replant, you actually have young seedlings or young plants getting disease because of that situation. So now with a German technology that I'm working on, along with the German technology supplier, machinery supplier, we can convert these oil palm trunks into useful wood products for furniture, for household interiors, like doors, windows. These are much higher value than plywood. Up to now, there's only one plant I know in Malaysia that is using oil palm trunks to make plywood, but that is a low value product, so it doesn't pay to do that. So for the first time, we have this technology and machinery to convert oil palm trunks into useful wood products. Another example, which is more relevant to the Indian situation, is straws, rice straws, wheat straws. There's a UK company, again, that I'm working with, that is using these straws to convert it into a type of plastics to replace the conventional plastic material. So you can imagine, again, we have billions of tons of rice and wheat and barley straws produced every year. And this is also contributing to climate change, because a lot of farmers burn, after harvest, they burn the straws, right? So that is, again, sending greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, right? So aside from motor cars polluting the environment, you have farmers polluting the environment as well. And Thailand, in the last 1 or 2 months, severe pollution, air pollution, because of burning of sugarcane in the field by farmers, before harvest. They burn off all the brown leaves before they harvest. So these are all factors that are not sustainable, but they are now technologies that can help to overcome climate change in this sense, right? Another example is using pineapple leaves to make clothing, right? And also banana to use for clothing. The Philippines is very big in this aspect. So now, lately, there's a Singapore company having a new technology to convert pineapple leaves to clothing material as well. So these are what I call second harvest, right? So after you harvested your wheat, your rice, now you have the straws to harvest and turn into money. So this is also helping farmers to get another source of income. So this is why second harvest it's coming into the sustainability picture.
Great, many interesting ideas on second harvest there. I think India is attempting to reduce oil imports, and oil palm is something that we are going to rely on. And Telangana, in fact, has earmarked as much as 2 million hectares to start growing oil palm. So second harvest can add even more income, and paddy. I think many of those examples are there. It's past 6 o'clock now, so let me use this opportunity to put the last question of the panel to Dr. Subba Rao now, just to build on this issue of second harvest and how we build climate risk mitigating approaches and sustainability. So are there some farm practices? You already talked about some carbon elements in your first comment. Can you build on that and say what else can be done as sustainability linked farm practices that will get us towards 2030 in a much more stronger manner?
Okay, thanks, Siva. Let me make a small attempt very quickly to raise your sensitivity about the impact of agriculture on the climate. I think we already mentioned it is there, but I think I don't know how many of you are really sensitive about it. I'll just put quickly some numbers. If you really want to grow and feed the population until 2050, many of you read that the production has to go up by 50% in case of grains and 70% for meat and animal products. Let us put it that way, right? And remember those numbers. And now, when you look at what is happening today is, if you want to meet those goals, there are going to be 3 gaps that are going to be coming into the play. Number 1 is the land gap. We don't have enough land. So you need to add about 600 million hectares, which is 2 times the size of India, land that you need, right? That is 1. And number 2 is the food gap, which we'll talk about later. But more importantly at this time, what I want to talk about is the greenhouse gas emissions gap. If you want to be very sensitive, and all of us want to contribute to the world to maintain that 1 degree, 2 degree, agriculture today emits about 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And if you are going to produce so much of food, it is going to go to 30 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So what we have to do is we have to reduce to almost 15 gigatons of carbon dioxide if you want to produce the same. It is very daunting, but at the same time, I think all of us are very innovative in doing many things. There are certain things that if you start doing, this is doable. Let me take you down to a few things, 4 or 5 things which all of us can contribute towards to are the following, right? First is shifting from animal meat to plant meat. There is a statistic, they say that the amount of meat that is consumed, even in the Western countries, only contributes to 3% of their calorie intake, okay? Shifting to plant proteins is important because if you look at the total greenhouse gas emissions, out of the total agriculture, 50% comes from the animals. You rear the animals, the gas, the methane that they produce is about 50%, and the rest of the 50% comes from our agriculture practice. So what are those 3 emissions? Number 1 is the methane that is produced, rice cultivation, I'll talk about as to why it happens. And number 2 is carbon dioxide, which is coming from the energy that we use. And third is nitrous oxide that is coming from nitrogen fertilizers. 3 major things. If you put some farm practices to reduce those, we can create a significant impact on reduction of greenhouse gases. First, rice. Why it produces methane gas is, as the manure under anaerobic conditions, it starts degrading. The microorganisms, when they start degrading, the byproduct is methane. So why rice? Unfortunately, the methane, it has to come out from the flooded conditions. Rice acts as a channel, right? So that is why rice cultivation is in the forefront of discussions. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to convince farmers to adopt practices. In India, it is happening to move from transplanted to DSR, where you use less water. That is one practice which all of us can implement to reduce the greenhouse gases. And in the same fields, if you use a fertilizer that is more fermented, I do not know how practical it is, we need to work on that. It is possible. Again, it will reduce the emission of methane. I think at least those 2 practices, when you start implementing, we can create an impact. And the more importantly, if you need to start using rice varieties where the unproductive tillers are not there, because those are the ones which act as channels for methane. So doing those things, we can create an impact on reduction of methane. Number 2 is the nitrous dioxide, which is basically nitrogen fertilizers that you use. Of course, the energy part of producing that is pretty big. People are trying to find alternate solutions as to how to produce nitrogen with a different energy source. But more importantly, on the farm, we can add some microorganisms wherein the nitrification inhibitors are there, right? So those things we can reduce. That's another farm practice that we can adopt. We can make it happen to adopt by the farmers, I'm sure, right? And the third one is what we call broadly climate smart agriculture, which is basically, if you look at the robotics that are coming in my personal opinion, though they are costly today, that is the best invention that can happen for India, in my opinion, wherein you are going to reduce a lot of that energy consumption, I would say, in the form of fossil fuels. And the second one is the digitization. See, in agriculture value chain, we burn a lot of fuel. We do so many practices which are not necessary. And then we can bring those efficiencies onto the farm. We can always contribute to a reduction of greenhouse gases. So very quickly, it is daunting, but it's doable, but only a matter of the solutions that we have in place. If they're implemented on large scale, we can really contribute significantly, not to contribute to escalation of the temperatures around the world. And then the moment that 1 degree goes up, that is going to significantly impact the yields. I don't think then we need more land, we are cutting out more forest. It's going to be a kind of, I will say, a loop that we'll get into. So let us go back and see personally what we can contribute, both in terms of reducing our protein intake, which is animal source. I also eat meat, but I am personally committed to reduce it. And as well as try to talk to people that they can adopt these simple practices to contribute towards it. Thanks.
Thank you. So many thoughts once again there. So with that, we wrap up the panel. And I hope, irrespective of whichever business that each of you are in, you have some takeaway. I don't want to re-summarize all of this. Once more, I want to thank each of the panelists for very interesting ideas as well as practical examples that they have shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to each and every one of you panelists, and I'm going to request you to please kindly remain on stage as I call on and just express our gratitude to each and every one.
Thanks, Pallavi. Just quick, I know Mr. Shukumar is stretched 15 minutes. He has to catch a flight quickly to Delhi. Thank you so much, sir, and the jury. I'll tell you, when we started 2019, one of the things that came into the mind about what should be the format of ABSA should be, Agri Business Summit and Awards. Mr. Shukumar suggested, Raj, let's have some intellectual discussion. And that's how this panel discussion is evolved. And it's immensely adding value to all of us as we progress in agriculture. So, sirs and madam, thank you so much. I request Managing Director, State Bank of India, Mr. Setish, to please come on stage and honor the jury. Mr. Siva Kumar, the moderator. Thank you. Mr. Subba Rao. Liew, my friend all the way from Singapore, thanks for coming. It's the second, I'm sure you're going to make it regular. Hema Yadav, madam, she herself is a recipient of Women for Agriculture and she's director come all the way from Pune. Thank you, ma'am. And Dr. Venkatesh Devanur, Agri Life, and you know about him. Thank you so much. I think I was just walking around and 3-4 people stopped me and said, boss, बहुत intensive है ये. So probably, in fact, some of them wanted to speak, maybe to some of you who want to take more details about what we discussed now. So I'm sure you will be helping. And thank you, sir. If you can, I don't know, I'm still not feeling like to let you go, but I know you had to catch a flight. And then, of course, Palla will take over from here for the next session.
Thank you.
From here. Yeah.
Check. Thank you, each one of our panelists as well as our moderator. Thank you.